All right, metal has really blown it out of the park this year so far, so let's keep that train chugging. Parrhesia by Animals as Leaders. So, Animals as Leaders is a pretty well-known, like, tech metal. And when I say tech, I mean like extreme tech, you know. They were one of the forefronts in this kind of new expression in metal music, you know, with the whole like gent kind of soundscapes with a lot of really big chuggy drops within it, you know, that really like borderlining between guitars and bass sounds and having like 8 to 12 string guitars sometimes, where you're both playing the lead guitar as well as the bass guitar kind of at the same time. Yeah, these guys were one of like the first to be on that movement. And I actually was introduced to them when Devin Townsend was touring the Z2 record. And yeah, they opened up for him and I was just blown away. Like the technical prowess of this group is just mind-boggling. And I mean, the friend that I went with, she was like, I was lulled into this hypnotic trance because everything was so percussive. Everything was so almost perfect to the point of it being like obscene. Like there was no room for error. There was no room for this kind of jazzy interpretation. It was all so straight and to the point, and it almost felt like constricting and so confining because of that. And I was like, yeah, I freaking loved it. We now come to Parrhesia, which is their fifth studio album. And so sitting this into their discography, there was actually quite a bit of a gap between this album and their last one, The Madness of Many, back in 2016. Since before that, they would release one album every other year to like every third year or so. Before The Madness of Many, we had The Joy of Motion in 2014, Weightless in 2011, and their self-titled debut album in 2009. So we've almost doubled the gap between the two, between The Madness of Many and Parrhesia. And honestly, I gotta say, this guy was well worth the wait. I love this album. It does follow suit very closely to the Animals as Leaders mythos, you know, very technical, like very technical, very fast paced at times. Like the keys that are being played on these guitars are just so like minutia perfect. It reminds me of kind of like if what King Crimson was doing in the 80s with their, you know, the three suites. If they had taken that, amped up the volume, amped up the speed, amped up the oomph, essentially that's what we have here. It's like so technical. But I friggin' love this, man. One of the things that I particularly like that kind of sets this album apart from the rest of their discography is kind of the use of the sounds of a synthesizer. And I tried to do some research to see if there was any actual credits in terms of who did the synths on here. I couldn't find anything. The closest I could find was like Tolson Abasai, the main, you know, the god behind the guitar there. He does a lot of like the programming and the orchestration aspects of it. And so I felt like perhaps he was kind of behind the keys, but I honestly wouldn't be surprised if all the sounds we were hearing were done with the guitars that just had some really gnarly effects on there. And these synth sounds are found kind of like right in your face, right? The second track of Monomyth, as well as the fourth track of Gestalter Falls, both of these tracks have this soundscape really in the forefront, you know, and it's kind of like allowing the guitars to take a little bit of a backseat and just provide straight up rhythm section to allow this like synth soundscapes to really like play your minds there. You know, both Gestalter Falls and Monomyth have like this creepy aspect to it with a little bit of the higher blends in the scales in that case. And Gestalter Falls having it more in like this atmosphere, this really weird and off-putting soundscapes that kind of remind me of like walking through a very misty moors in that kind of sense. The same can also be found for like the really big track that's found off of this album of The Problem of Other Minds. Again, it's right in the background, setting the mood, setting the stage for the overall sound proper, but it's also just kind of elevating the atmosphere of the track. And of course, the second last track of Microaggressions has like it starts off pretty prominent with like this more synthy sound that then bleeds into the song proper. But I have kind of jumped throughout the tracks. In fact, I think I've covered all of the even numbers on here. Let's talk about some of the odd numbers on here. The first track, Conflict of Cartography. Man, it opens up just as you would expect a Animals as Leaders track to open up. It's meaty, it's chunky. They're playing a lot with the different soundscapes and a lot of the different rhythm sections on here. Man, I really do have to tip my hat off to Xavier Reese trying to keep up with Tosin, trying to play on par. And I know that, in the past, it was mainly just Tosin and Xavier coming on kind of to fill up the shoes in live performances. But I mean, his presence can be found on here. Xavier is less of a studio musician at this point and much more of a individual that's actually integrated in the band proper. And Matthew Garska on the drums, man, can that man play. Because the tracks are so technical and so like minutely planned out, Matthew doesn't have a whole lot of extra time to make any flourishes. He's just really playing to keep up with the time. But even still, he's able to put his own flair and his own personality on here so that it's not just a timekeeper trying to keep rhythm. He's literally introducing his own personality in this, and that is really well apparent just within this first track. And I also like the fact that they don't just blow down the doors on every single track. The third track of Red Miso is such a soothing and much more somber track compared to the first two of Conflict of Cartography and Monomyth. But I mean, they still have that very chunky and juicy kind of gent drops about halfway through, but it allows for a nice build-up. And if we want to talk about like pure atmosphere, Ashai, the fifth track, really is. It's like the midway point, it's the halfway mark of this album, and it does just a great job of allowing us to just kind of take a breather between Gestalter Falls and the Problems of Other Minds. It's just like this really nice atmospheric track to kind of provide a little halfway point and just allow us to breathe a little bit before we jump right into the... One of my favorite tracks off of this, the seventh track of Thoughts and Prayers. I love the build-ups of this track. I love that each passage of this track is really well thought out and kind of lends to the next one. I do find a lot of the times on this expression of music, sometimes these passages of tracks just kind of meander without any rhyme or reason, but at least with Thoughts and Prayers, there does seem to be a concrete endpoint. Like each passage really does build up to the next and then build up to the next. And so each passage kind of provides the momentum for the playing styles of the next one. And the album closes with probably the most chaotic and intangible track out of the whole group, Gordian Knot. Dang, this thing is just chaos and order kind of like bashing against one another because the band is playing like ridiculously fast, but it's always like perfectly laid out. And really it does like go from one passage to another. And like each one is just bang on time. And I want to get to one last point is that I am so glad that they decided to kind of have this album be a little bit on the shorter side. It's about 36 minutes, almost 37 minutes. And that's the perfect runtime for this kind of music. I feel like once you get past the 40-minute mark for this kind of music, it just starts to really become redundant, and I feel like it's so hard to maintain that same kind of level of energy and attention span, because I'll tell you, after about that 7 minutes, I'm tapped out and I'm ready to restart it to really get back into it and start to really examine the music that's going on here. So the runtime, the way that this album is structured, very, very well done. I feel like they really went into this with the idea of creating an album rather than creating a bunch of songs to go onto an album. In the end, Parrhesia was fantastic. I think that this is probably the band's strongest and most mature work. They have learned how to really synthesize and really concisely perform a lot of these more technical, very extreme technical metal works. If you're into guitar works as a craft, if you're into, really analyzing and dissecting rhythm styles, time signatures, you're going to really, really love this. If you're a fan of Animals as Leaders, this one definitely just satisfies so very, very well. It's probably my favorite release from them, and I've been having a ball with this. It's for that reason that I have to say that Parrhesia from Animals as Leaders is one that I absolutely love with my whole heart. And so that's about it for Parrhesia from Animals as Leaders. What did you guys think about this album? How does it hold up with the rest of their discography? And where does it land in this year's metal output? I mean, I've been blown away by the metal output this year, so let me know all about that by commenting down below. And that's all I've got for you guys today. So thank you all so much for watching. As always, you guys are definitely the best. And until next time, notes out.